Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise on the matter of the EPBC Act, the Board Management Bill 2025, and the bill adjusts the EPBC Act, specifically in relation to our Commonwealth national parks, including the iconic and deeply loved Kakadu National Park, the alluring Uluru-Kata National Park and the beautiful Boonderee National Park. The board management plans for two of these three national parks are in fact due to expire, and one later this year in November and one early next year in February, and with no new management plans approved or implemented prior to the expiry. And what that means is the respective boards will be unable to make any decisions during that period. And I'd like to remind the House that these board management plans have in fact a 10-year lifespan. And so it does beg the question, Deputy Speaker, why has this taken this government so long? They've been in office, of course, for 3 years, as Australians are fully aware, and they have overseen the failure of not one but two new board management plans. And so the government knew that this was coming. They had 3 years' notice to deliver these new plans. The question again, what have they been doing?
Good question.
To what extent is this legislation just a band-aid solution? Well, a band-aid on the incompetence of the Albanese Labor government, some would say. But I would say that you need a very large band-aid. I'd go as far as to say that you probably need a bandage to cover up the gaping wounds of Labor's failure to deliver. Now, this isn't the first example of the government's failure to deliver when it comes to the environment. We need look no further than the harmful algal bloom in South Australia,
That's right.
which I've been talking about now in this place for some months. These coastal communities that have been completely and utterly let down by this government. They failed to act early and they failed to contain the bloom. Now, the bloom is double the size of the Australian Capital Territory, and it can be seen on satellite images from space. Now, walking on Australian beaches year-round is a luxury we enjoy, many of us. I think 85% of Australians live on the coastline in our great country. But for South Australians, this luxury has not existed for months and months. The beaches are closed and warnings are in place to stay clear, with big signs that I've seen for myself on the 2 visits that I've made to South Australia. The community has been devastated, and when I met with fishers and members of the community during the 2 trips, the first one where I went down to Flinders University and spoke with the scientists there. I also went to the Yorke Peninsula and spoke with the fishers. I also met with heads of industry from Port Lincoln during the first trip, who told me all of their concerns, and the fishers who haven't been able to make any income over the period, but also the fact that they are devastated, Madam Deputy Speaker. They are devastated for their ecosystems and how long it's going to take them to come back. We also, on the second trip, the Leader of the Opposition accompanied me, Senator Ruston accompanied me, the member for Grey, again for a second time, accompanied, and Senator McLaughlin, senators for South Australia, of course, accompanied me to see the bloom again and to engage for a period of time, a long period of time. We walked on the jetty at Ardrossan. I myself walked the jetty twice with the member for Grey. The Leader of the Opposition walked the jetty at Ardrossan, but what we didn't see was this Labor government turn up and walk the jetty in Ardrossan. Instead, there was a very short press conference, a dash down to South Australia to have a press conference to announce a modest amount of funding. And now there are fresh health concerns for asthmatics. There are members of the community walking their dogs on the beach who have to wear a mask, whose eyes are getting puffy because of the algal bloom. When it's windy, the bloom comes off the ocean and affects their health. My point is that this has become an environmental event that deserves national attention, and it deserves stronger leadership. But the Albanese government were very flat-footed on this issue. They were late to the party. They were the last to the party. The Prime Minister had a very quick dash down to Kangaroo Island, didn't tell the press he was going, and announced a very small amount of funding, extra funding, $5 million, to assist. And so it's not good enough. And the scientists that I talked about and those who wrote to the government almost 2 years ago, what was the government's response to their requests for support? To monitor the algal bloom so that they could understand when the bloom was going to pop up, how big it could become, where it would move to, and understand and have the baseline data in order to compare the new data that they could have collected to compare to see what the bloom would do. And the government's response to the requests from those scientists almost 2 years ago was complete and utter rejection. They denied those scientists funding under two ministers, firstly under Minister Plibersek and now under Minister Watt. Now, I just want to say to Australians, this government speaks big on its environmental credentials and loves to harp on about the science. Well, this time they ignored the science. They were late because they ignored the science again in March when the dead marine animals were washing up on the beaches, and they ignored the scientists again when scientists and businesses asked for assistance. But they were denied twice. Only after the repeated calls and the pressure applied by those on this side of the House, and I've already listed them, the member for Grey was instrumental in that, the new member for Grey doing a fantastic job speaking up for his community who were being ignored by this government in South Australia. He spoke and advocated for his community, and what did he get? He got the Shadow Minister for the Environment there, he got senators involved, and he got a visit from the Leader of the Opposition. 2 weeks before, or let's say a week before, the Prime Minister arrived in South Australia. Look, the funding that was outlined was absolutely welcome, but as the Fishers told us during our 2 roundtables with them, it's too hard to apply for, it's too little, and it's too late. Those scientists and businesses and the Red Cross, I might add, are still asking for assistance and still asking for funding from this government. I mean, if it was happening in the Great Barrier Reef, it was happening in Bondi, Freo, Geelong, there would be an outcry, an uproar, or even a bushfire. If there was a cyclone or a flood, there's no doubt that the government would have been tripping over themselves to get there and to support those communities. In June, the marine death toll was at 14,000. And it's heartbreaking to now report that that number is at 34,000. It has more than doubled in 3 months. And this number will continue to climb and there's no end in sight. They think now the algal bloom may go into spring and then on to summer, which is devastating for the local communities. And I'm very concerned about how many more thousands of animals will die. If not tens of thousands more marine creatures will wash up dead by Christmas. The impact on our precious Great Southern Reef ecosystem is indeed devastating. And the ongoing pressure on South Australians, their businesses, industry, tourism and their beaches and their communities, their local caravan parks, the fish and chip shops, you name it, are all under pressure. And it is heartbreaking. The Albanese government has let this algal bloom blow out of control. There's no way to sugarcoat that. International scientists have now weighed in and they declare it's one of the worst algal blooms they've ever seen. So buyer beware, because South Australians were ignored when they were asking this government for help. They were failed by this government. And this Albanese Labor government continues to fail. They promised to reduce your power bills. They failed. They promised to build more homes. They failed. Whilst blaming broken and outdated EPBC laws, they failed to address last term as the reason why they're behind on their housing targets. They promised you'd only need your Medicare card to see a doctor. Australians know there's a co-payment. They know they will be out of pocket. They need 2 cards. You're still paying, and you're still waiting. Still paying, still waiting. It's no wonder that Labor have had to bring forward the EPBC Board Management Bill, because they are now forecasting their own failure on managing the environment and the management of our Commonwealth reserves. Labor also has a track record of failure when it comes to environment legislation. It's true. When the Coalition was in government, we began the reform of the EPBC Act under the Leader of the Opposition, who was then the Minister. It was the Coalition that commissioned the Graham Samuel Review under the Leader of the Opposition, who was then the Environment Minister. It was the Coalition that introduced legislation to reform the EPBC Act under the Leader of the Opposition, then the Environment Minister, and legislation commissioned by the Leader of the Opposition that Labor blocked in the Senate. And for the last 3 years, Labor has failed to deliver any environmental reform. During the last term, then Environment Minister, the member for Sydney, proved completely unable to deliver Labor's promised overhaul of the EPBC Act. She promised multiple times that this overhaul would be finalised by the end of 2023. But we saw deferral after deferral, and her agenda and her proposals were labelled as friendless. The stakeholders didn't agree, nobody would agree, to the point where the Prime Minister had to step in and stop all reforms prior to the election, for fear of losing out when Western Australians hit the ballot box, because, of course, the election was imminent. What we are left with is a long approval process full of red and green tape, resulting in Australia becoming a much less attractive nation for investment, and now we are dropping in the ranks for countries to invest in under this government's watch. We are losing out on jobs, industries and economic activity. And former Treasury Secretary Ken Henry recently said, Australia's environment protection laws have both failed to stop the degradation of Australia's natural environment and held back economic growth, and they are undermining productivity. Businesses putting in applications for environmental approvals under the EPBC Act are happy to do so. They are all very proud and accepting of doing their bit for the environment. They want to contribute, but what they need is certainty. They need to know what the rules are. However, the challenges and roadblocks they face are with the time, the cost and the duplication, along with uncertainty associated with the approvals process. It's important to have an effective process that conserves our environment, which is degrading. We need to conserve our environment, and one that looks after the economy with a sensible balance front of mind. And under Labor, the average time to have an application processed is, wait for it, drum roll, more than 3 years. 3 years. And the North West Shelf final application is still pending. Labor is completely divided on whether they support the jobs and wealth created for our nation by the resources sector. They put off a decision on the North West Shelf until after the election. Now, the new minister has provided a preliminary approval for the project. And whilst we welcome the extension, negotiations on the applications of environmental conditions have taken way too long. 3 years seems to be the common theme, because it also took them 3 years to approve the 100 wind turbine projects on Robbins Island in Tasmania, placing a whopping 88 environmental conditions on that project, including potentially stopping the wind farm from operating for certain periods of the year. It shouldn't take 3 years to get a decision. The list of delays and missed opportunities keeps growing under this government. Let's face it, this is the statement. Environmental reform is too important to get wrong. Environmental reform is too important to get wrong for our future generations. Getting it right is critical for the environment, and it's important for business and for jobs. The Coalition stands ready to work with Minister Watt and the Albanese government to achieve the sensible reform that Australians want to see, that stakeholders want to see. And I will say that my door is open, and I welcome the opportunity for engagement on delivering the right reform. And I have extended the same offer to the Premier of Western Australia. My door is open to not only parliamentarians on this matter, but also to stakeholders, to dozens and dozens of stakeholders that I have been engaging with. I've been meeting with them across industry, but also across states and territories. And they are passionate. They want to be active in this reform agenda. Industry and environmentalists understand the desperate need, the urgent need for reform that is well overdue. And they understand that we need to strike the right balance for the environment and for business. There is a clear pathway ahead between the government and the coalition. Stakeholders are united on reform taking place to reduce the timeframes for application outcomes, to reduce costs and to deliver certainty. We need a bipartisan approach to this legislation, and having major parties of government come to the table on EPBC reform would produce the best outcome for our nation. And the overwhelming majority of stakeholders are calling for us to work on this together, to ensure that approval powers remain with the Federal Minister and that duplication with the states and other federal legislation be mitigated or removed altogether. On the other hand, there are two outcomes that would be devastating for our nation on EPBC reform. The first is if Labor were to deal and do a deal with the Greens. This would thwart economic activity and have significant consequences for investment in our country. It would cost Australians their jobs and it would reduce productivity. The Western Australia Premier knows it, which is why he made a dash to Canberra last week to speak with the Minister. The second devastating outcome would be more EPBC paralysis. We need to get approvals processes moving more efficiently. We don't want it to continue the way it has under the Albanese Labor government in the last 3 years. We need to get productivity moving, and we must attract investment, create jobs, and conserve and preserve and look after our environment for future generations. I stand ready to work with the Albanese government on EPBC reform. I cannot be clearer. My door is open, and on the EPBC Board Management Bill, it is very important to fix these loopholes, but it's even more important for the government to do its job and deliver on its environmental responsibilities.